As far as battleships concerned, we are on the map Land of Fire. I'm going to be doing map tactics for Land of Fire because I really enjoy Land of Fire. It's one of those maps where you've got a lot of options. You can ambush from a lot of different locations, and as a destroyer or even as a cruiser, your detectability is a huge part of your class on this map. With so many islands, there's so many ambush potential locations. First thing you do when you load up a map, check the teams. Now the teams are carbon copies of each other for battleships, for cruisers, for destroyers. There's no excuse. There should be a destroyer on every flank. There should be cruisers, battleships, you name it. You need to work together. There's no aircraft carriers. So that means you're not going to really have someone try and eliminate an isolated target. The destroyers will be allowed to do whatever they want. It's a lot easier for them to be sneaky when there's no aircraft carrier on the map. Speaking of destroyers, how do they start Land of Fire? In the standard game mode, I like to break the map up at the 7 line. I feel like that is basically how most encounters go with standard in Land of Fire. You have one team push the west, one team push the east, and the 7 line provides you cover from both. So whoever has control over that area has a lot of potential protection that they can make use of. And as a destroyer, you need to be the first ones out there trying to scout. Now the western destroyer, you can see it sort of goes towards the center of the map. I also like to sort of curve back around and look around on the west. On the east, you really want to try and avoid a potential ambush. A lot of enemies, and I don't know why destroyers like to do this, a lot of destroyers like to go the 10 line at the very edge of the map. And I've also seen cruisers do this as well. It's not a good strategy. You really put yourself in a position to be boxed in. You can't over pursue into the enemy territory and not have backup. You actually have to have a strong flank pushing against the enemy. There's not really a situation where I've found a destroyer or a cruiser that have made it all the way behind the enemy lines and had a lot of success. It's just too easy to isolate you and destroy you because you've already isolated yourself from your team. So aircraft carriers, they know you're going the 10 line. I send my fighters over the 10 line because I scout out a destroyer or a cruiser 7 out of 10 times. You would be surprised. It's just a consistent strategy that's used, and when a strategy is predictable, then it's very easy to counter. And there's too many islands in the area to really avoid an attack from an aircraft carrier. You might make a mistake. You might run aground. It'll force out a smoke, and then you don't have that charge for later. It's just a bad strategy. Another location that aircraft carriers love to send their fighters, their bombers, and their torpedo bombers is over the area. I would define it as the 3-4 line. That's a really good in-between of the enemy team who decides to go the western side of the map. It's a good attack path if you're interested in going after the destroyer, an isolated battleship, maybe an isolated cruiser. However, that's not a good way of starting out the match. I tend to avoid cruisers as my first strike opportunity, but that doesn't make it a bad strategy to go down this area. You also scout for the team, and these two areas basically define where the enemy is going to be. Another potential location is down the 7 line. That's a good way of scouting out the players that might go the eastern side of the map. I just like to pick on anyone who decides to use the 10 line as their strategy because I think it's a terrible strategy. And I'm going to prove it to you because I know someone's going to do it. Every time I'm in an aircraft carrier, I send my fighters or whatever down that line. Inevitably, I'm scouting you out. And now it's not an ambush. It's not a surprise. You need to cancel that strategy, or you're probably going to get found out by my friends if I don't take you out. Cruisers are great, but they're supportive on this map, I think. I just feel like the way the map plays out between the west and the east, it's not good for cruisers. The west is just such a stalemate. It's just like trap and A point. It's so easy to get bogged down and stay away from the enemy, but also take a lot of damage because battleships are looking for targets that they can penetrate with their AP. You can't put yourself in a position where you're an easy target. So it tends to end up where you stay behind or close to battleships that are pushing the west, and you're really moving at a snail's pace. You basically protect them from other cruisers and destroyers on the west, and that's completely fine. Just make sure you understand that's what happens. On the eastern side of the map, it's a little bit more akin to you can take care of yourself, you're the primary pushing force, but it's still dangerous if you run into the enemy flank, and it's a coin toss, really. Are they going to go to the west? Are they going to go to the east? And if they go the way that you are ending up, and you are underpowered, you need to play passively and pull back. But if you run into enemy destroyers and enemy cruisers that also push the east, it's very easy to find a target that will willingly show their side or take out a destroyer that overextends. That's just the nature of the eastern side of the map. All these islands, they don't really respect that there could be a ship at a different angle than the ships that they see. So they'll hide behind an island, and a friendly is in the perfect position to get a citadel, or they'll run into an island on the eastern side of the map. These are just the facts of being a cruiser, and that's what I see most of the time in Land of Fire Standard. For battleships, you guys are the pace setters. You really are. In the west, if you overwhelm the enemy with numbers, you should push, because the east will be pushing. This is one of those maps where Standard, you actually do win on cap sometimes. It's very rare, but it has happened to me more often than I want to admit. And Land of Fire has to do with it. The islands protect you. It sort of breaks the map in two. And if you don't have a defense force, you're going to be overwhelmed. You can't stop them. You will not be able to push fast enough because inherently people want to play passively for whatever reason. They don't recognize that they have more numbers than the enemy on that flank. They would rather leave it to RNG and citadels than to use the amount of guns and just overwhelm them with chip damage. Chip damage cannot be countered. That's why cruisers are so successful in team battles. You cannot counter HE. There's not enough damage controls in the world to protect you from consistent HE damage. And that's true for battleships. I personally like to make sure that the eastern side, whether it's a full push or a defense, is the way I like to go. I just feel more comfortable around those islands. I have a pretty good understanding of what it takes to defend and what it takes to push on this map. And in this particular game, I decided to push the east. Well, the team didn't decide to push the east, so I had to play it passive because the enemy has pushed the east. We have to pull back. We have to play to our strengths. We don't have the numbers to take them on. They're just going to wear us down. So our team pushed the western side of the map. They got behind the enemy team. They put pressure on the base, and we avoided that base race scenario because we basically were in their way. They had to angle against us or fire upon us, and it didn't work out for them. Now we can engage a weakened flank. We can also protect our base because the enemy team couldn't push fast enough to threaten ours. So it's not a base race. We have full control over win or loss, and that's what you want to have. You want to have full control and force the enemy team to overextend. Destroyers and domination. You want to take the objective. Go to the closest one, try and take it. If there are enemies there, pull back. If you're able to successfully capture the base, then try to help out another capture point. That's great for your team. B is pretty isolated. I wouldn't send anyone but destroyers to B. Cruisers and battleships are just going to take so much damage from the enemy. Now, later on, yeah, sure. There's very little left in the match. It doesn't matter. But at the beginning, it's really on the destroyers to play the objective correctly. And it's okay to be one down. It's unacceptable to be 3 objectives down to the enemy. You cannot expect your team to come back. It's pretty much like this scenario. The enemy team will have full control over what you intend to do, and they can just reinforce bases against you. So really make an effort for capturing a base as a destroyer. And I gotta say, it's probably the most fun aspect of the match is running into enemy destroyers and trying to take them on. Even if you're a Japanese destroyer, you can do a pretty good job. You can scout for your team and allow them to fire on that destroyer that's trying to capture the base. You should have cruisers and battleships that come with you as well. For aircraft carriers, I again like to scout out the 10 line because for whatever reason players just do that. And you can also send your aircraft along the islands. The 7 line islands are great. The area in between A and B is also a great way to get to targets that might be interesting to you. Maybe it's an isolated battleship, maybe it's a destroyer trying to capture. You keep those targets scouted and your team should be able to at least make them think twice about trying. And I think that works out really well on this map. You should try and make use of that. The western side of the map is a little bit closer to most of the enemy when they try. Again, just like Trap, A tends to have battleships and cruisers gravitate towards it. Whether it's the right strategy or not is irrelevant. The western border just has too much traffic. I prefer to try and take out destroyers or scout destroyers for my team. Your team will help you out. Try and put yourself in a position to have cruisers and battleships that are close by in order to engage those destroyers. Same with friendly destroyers as well. You also get their smoke, which is a huge issue later on in the fight. For battleships, you want to make sure you're in between. I hate border. You're too far away. You're just too far away. So the two locations that I would prefer you go as a battleship, you want to go sort of south of the island chain around C, and the 7 line. It really works really well. You can engage players at B, you can engage players at C, you can protect yourself from torpedoes because you're far enough back, there's islands, you get the idea. Those areas are low enough that you can fire over them as well if you need to. But most battleships tend to head for the area just south of A and maybe a little bit in between B. Those islands protect you and you'll stay bow on. I just don't like it. It is a stalemate. Someone has to break up the stalemate. I usually end up doing that. But that is a strategy that you can make use of, and I wouldn't fault you for that. For cruisers, it's really dangerous to head out west. The big boys come and play. You don't want to be broadside to any battleships because they're going to go after you. I guarantee it. I prefer to go for C. I think C is a better option for cruisers. You can use the islands, you can use angling. You get the picture. If you go out west, you need to try and avoid taking damage. And the best way to avoid taking damage is to not fire your gun and be behind friendlies who are taking damage. So someone's taking damage in the west. You need to make sure you take out any destroyer that might come to you, but B is basically off limits for the start of the match. It's just too dangerous. You're too out in the open. It's too easy for crossfire. So there's some key points on the map that most players end up going. They're very defensive. They have islands that you can either fire over or protect you from the enemy incoming fire. They also block line of sight. They block torpedoes. You name it. That's why they use it. I see a lot of enemy teams set up in the southwest side of the map. Now, it is sort of out in the open, but the way the islands work out, you sort of have your max range reach out to the circle of islands that goes in the northwest, and it sort of wraps around and gets to the 7 line. So the enemy team in the north, if they want to retreat, they have to deal with islands, and they will be broadside. That's what I think people are taking advantage of when they set up in that position specifically. The southeast side, the northeast side, these areas are great to overlook C, overlook B. It's just great. And I'm sorry, Ghost. I'm sorry. I wanted to kill that guy so bad. I'm so sorry, Ghost, though. I know you watch me. I'm sorry. I believe the northwest area is also used for that very reason. You have enough range that anyone that comes inside of the island system will be punished hard. And I tend to do this more often than I want to admit because I underestimate their ability to hit shots at extreme ranges. And they will hit them, so be careful. The islands are great at protecting you, but once you move inside of those islands, you are on your own. As far as mid to late game, be ready for destroyers. Going from B to C, A to B, you get the idea. You need to use those islands to ambush them because they will use it to ambush you. You need to be careful. If you're scouted, just assume that the enemy is paying 100% attention to your ship and they should be in a good position to counter whatever you're trying to do. I really like the islands that circle A and B, and those same islands go in between B and C. It's just a great way to move throughout the map. It allows you to put a lot of fire on the enemy, and you're protected for a significant amount of that time. So, how did this game go? Well, the team was successful in pushing the west. We were successful in retreating. We basically stalled them out short of our base, and I came back around trying to use those islands to protect me. I just went to the western side of the 7 line and came back, and basically we're going to do crossfire if they ever went past that middle line that divides the north from the south. And none of them did, because they knew they would probably take citadels and torpedoes. And that worked out perfectly. Now, we had our angling against a battleship or two. They fired, they did a lot of damage. They got us all the way down to something like 500 hit points. And that Fletcher, if he was in the area, he probably could have gotten a kill on me. But I believe he gave up on the game and just was running to avoid the cost of repairing the ship. And I just don't play that way. I think that's boring, and you're just accepting defeat. I don't like that at all. But the team did a great job. And again, Ghost, I'm very sorry for taking that kill. I was frustrated with the knight. I saw a side-on shot. I was just not landing the citadels that I wanted to. I felt like, we gotta do it. And it was your kill. You were gonna kill him. That destroyer did a great job. I felt like I did a better job, but obviously I didn't. I didn't do a lot of damage. I was just there to prevent the enemy from escaping. And I felt pretty happy about that. I hope you enjoyed this game. I hope you enjoyed the discussion. Hope you have a fantastic day, and I'll catch you next time.